sometimes when we read the Quran, we kind of get caught up in like really tiny, tiny particulars, and we obsess over them as a reader. But rather to say, look, there's this message in its totality that is shaping my ways of seeing this universe. And if I can allow myself to be patient and not being in a rush, and knowing that at this stage in my life, if I'm a 25-year-old Muslim man, the Quran is going to speak to me differently than when I'm 45 years old and I may be married and I have children. And that every stage of my life, the Quran is speaking to me differently. And that is why the Quran is a book that is timeless and eternal. Because it's not like, you know what, Sheikh, I read the Quran, I'm done. I should understand how to live my life. It's when you read it today and then you read it tomorrow, each day it's going to hit you differently. It hit you personally differently. Because today I was in a good mood and I understand how to deal with my good mood. Tomorrow I was in a bad mood. I know how to deal with my bad mood. Today my kids were difficult with me. I know how to respond to that. I made money. I lost money. It's just that attitude of every single day. I need reinforcement from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala how to process my thoughts. So I was just going to begin with that because it is simple, but I believe to be one of the things that opened my heart, because I was one of those who began to obsess over, you know, the asbab al-nuzul and why did this verse come down? It's like, no. What does this verse do for me today? Right? Allahu a'lam. Right.
Jazakumullah khairan. That's beautiful. And I love the example that you gave, Dr. Osman, barakallahu feek. Oftentimes, people connect to the Quran on occasions. And by occasions, I don't necessarily mean, something of a celebration. But oftentimes, as many community members, will express something difficult has happened, and then they'll turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Or someone has passed away in their families or communities, and then they'll turn to the Quran and start to recite. And of course, what will hit them hardest at that point is what's relevant to their situation. And we'll ask, in these conversations, how did that make you feel? They said, well, I felt like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was speaking to me, to my situation. I felt like so much more fulfilled spiritually, even while going through grief or hardship. And we always ask, and it's a reminder for all of us, what if you were to take that in, that source of guidance and benefit and personal relevance on a daily basis? You had a daily wird, like a daily recitation. And not just a recitation on the tongue, but your heart was present. You were paying attention. You understood what you were reciting to an extent. Then you would take, as you mentioned, Dr. Osman, you would take in everything you need for the experiences that you're going through in your life. Whether you're close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or you feel disconnected and distant, it'll remind you and bring you back. Whether you're happy for something that you have, a life of relative ease, alhamdulillah, may Allah grant us all afiyah, or you're going through a hardship, may Allah grant us all relief. It reminds me of a statement of one of the companions who said, turn your happiness, your moments of happiness into gratitude for Allah, and turn your moments of sadness into sabr for Allah, perseverance and willpower and patience. And at the end of the day, the Quran gives us those reminders, and we are always in need of it. وَذَكِّرْ فَإِنَّ الذِّكْرَى تَنْفَعُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. Remind, for verily the reminders benefit the believers. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us from amongst those who are constantly taking in this shifa, this healing, as we discuss that concept of healing in another episode. Dr. JInan, I'm going to ask you, inshallah ta'ala, the same question. How can a person reach a point where they always feel like the Quran is addressing them personally? Barakallahu feekum.
Jazakumullah khairan. Firstly, thank you, both of you, especially Dr. Osman. As you were speaking, I was nodding the whole time with everything that you were saying. Jazakumullah khairan. I think another thing perhaps that I would add to that is also to consider who the Quran is from. I think it's something that's very, very important because sometimes we view the Quran as even like a book of information or, a book of miracles and all of these different things so that we can be, in awe of the Quran. And, it's definitely very important for us to see a book of guidance, but then it's like, who is guiding us? It's Allah has sent us this book. Allah has sent us this book as a rahmah, as a mercy, as a book of guidance, as, glad tidings for those who believe, right? And so when we think of this is actually a personal message to humanity, but to you specifically from Allah. And who is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Allah is Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. He is the most merciful, the most compassionate. He is Al-Alim Al-Hakim. He is the all-knowing, the most wise. So, it's like if somebody, came and tried to give me advice about something, and even if it sounded good, I'd want to know their credentials, right? So, let's just say if I was giving nutritional advice to someone, they'd be like, well, that sounds great, but what's your background? Have you studied nutritional sciences, right? Like you want to know. And so that's why sometimes when people read the Quran, they might have perhaps because of our, modern age, a kind of even skepticism towards the Quran. But when you start to consider, this is not a book that was sent by, by a person, by a human being. This is actually by Allah. Like, can you imagine? We have the speech, we have the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that is addressing you, that is addressing me. And who is Allah? Again, we go to the names and the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when we know that Allah knows everything, the past and the present and the inner and the outer, we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is more merciful towards us than, our own mothers. And so everything in this book, it's a guidance, and it's out of care for you. It's guiding you to what? Guiding you to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself, and guiding you to Jannah. Like, that is the purpose. And so if you take the lessons for yourself, inshallah, that is where you're going to end up. That's what Allah is promising us through the Quran.